All right. So folks, are you seeing the PowerPoint, I think, right now, right?
Yes.
Awesome. So hello, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. As was said, my name is Seth Maid. I'm the Director of Membership and Communication for the North Carolina chapter of NASW. And I am here tonight for the next hour to talk with y'all about building your social work resume. If we have some time, we'll be able to get into maybe other topics such as cover letters, professional references, things like that. If we don't get to those things, again, I am going to provide this PowerPoint. So you will have access to those slides even if we don't get to those tonight. But what we're going to spend most of today talking about is building your professional resume, because that is such an important part of finding a job. I know that we have a mix of BSW and MSW students on the Zoom tonight. So if you are a BSW student who is not going directly into the field, if maybe you're going to grad school next year, this is still an important thing for you to think about, because not only are you going to be looking for a job sooner than later, but if you are applying for internships or things like that, you're likely going to have to submit a resume to those places as well. So even if you're not going directly into the field, this is something that I think you'll still be able to get some good information out of. So before I start talking too much about resumes, though, I do want to spend just a couple minutes talking about NASW. So NASW is the National Association of Social Workers, and we are your professional association. Just like doctors have the American Medical Association, lawyers have the American Bar Association, you as social workers have NASW. We have over 111,000 members across 55 different chapters. You can see kind of our mission statement to strengthen and unify the profession, promote the development of social work, and advance social justice and social welfare. We also oversee the Code of Ethics. So I'm assuming at this point in your schooling, most of y'all, if not all of y'all, are familiar with the Code of Ethics. These are the ethical standards that you're going to be asked to uphold throughout your entire professional career. So if you haven't read them or you haven't read them in a while, I strongly encourage you to go to the NASW website to check them out. Here in North Carolina, I know that some of you might be located in South Carolina, others of y'all might be located in North Carolina. I can speak to the North Carolina chapter. We have over 5,100 members across North Carolina. We also actually oversee NASW's international district. So that means that after you graduate, if you move to another country to do social work and you're a member of NASW, you would actually still be affiliated with the North Carolina chapter. One thing I really like to mention to students is our virtual local program units. So these are basically groups of social workers that are arranged geographically, because before the pandemic, they would meet in person. Now they all meet online, but they meet for continuing education and for networking. And these are a really great opportunity for social work students to A, learn more about social work practice areas that they may have some interest in, but also B, begin building your professional network. We know that some of the best ways to get a job is to know someone who works in that practice area or know someone who works at the organization where you're applying. And so it's really important that you connect with social workers. So every single one of these virtual local program unit meetings are completely free for students to attend. Doesn't matter if you're a member of NASW, not a member, doesn't matter if you live in South Carolina or North Carolina. If you're a student, you can attend them for free. So I encourage you to go to the NASW North Carolina website, check out our local program unit calendar, and see what's coming up. I did want to mention a couple of our career resources. So if you're looking for a job in North Carolina, we do have a job bank that usually has between 75 and 100 North Carolina social work jobs. If you are a member of NASW North Carolina, so unfortunately this is only open to the North Carolina folks, you can access resume review. So resume review means you can send me your resume and I will give you individualized feedback on it. And we can do that over email, or we can set up a Zoom and have a one-on-one conversation about it and walk through your resume in real time. Career consultation, licensure consultation, questions about social work practice areas, those are all things you can do if you're an NASW North Carolina member. Wanted to just mention a couple other things. So this is Social Work Month, so happy Social Work Month to everyone. You can go to the NASW North Carolina website, get a lot of information about Social Work Month, see what events are happening, download Zoom backgrounds like the one that I have right now, other things. If you are a BSW student who is about to graduate and you live in North Carolina, again, you have to live in North Carolina for this one, you can apply for our Toby Brown Award. The Toby Brown Award is an award that goes to a graduating BSW student. It comes with a $1,500 cash prize and 2 years of membership to NASW. You can go to the NASW North Carolina website to check that out. If you're an MSW student, who is interested in doing clinical social work and you have questions about clinical supervision, you can attend our upcoming student webinar on March 28th. It's next week. And this is going to have a panel who are going to be there to answer whatever questions you have about clinical supervision. Like, how do you find a supervisor? What do you do in supervision? What if you have an issue with your supervisor, and more? So you can go and register for that on the NASW North Carolina website. I also wanted to mention our last student webinar of the 2022-2023 school year, which will be happening on April 13th. That will be me talking all about social work job interviews. So how to prepare for a job interview, what to think about, what to do. We'll talk about in-person job interviews, phone interviews, Zoom interviews, kind of everything you can think of. So if that's something that's interesting to you, you can also register for that right now as well. So there are a lot of join NASW. One of the best reasons to join NASW is it is so much cheaper if you join while you are still a student. You can see the price of student membership versus what happens if you wait till after you graduate. So if you're an MSW, for example, it goes from $60 to almost $240. If you join as a student, you can also qualify for up to 3 years of cheaper membership rates even after you graduate. So if it's something you've been thinking about doing and you're about to graduate, I strongly recommend that you do it soon. If you join NASW North Carolina in the next week, and you send me an email to let me know, I will send you a free NASW North Carolina t-shirt. You can see some of the options we have here. So if you know anything I've said tonight has just made the decision for you to join, please let me know. We can get you connected with a t-shirt. All right. So with that being said, that is my NASW spiel. And now we'll start talking about probably the things that you're a little bit more interested in hearing me talk about, which is beginning to build your social work resume. So we're going to start all the way at the beginning. What are hiring managers looking for when they look at a resume? So some of this is going to be a little obvious, right? They want to know what you can do for them. They want to know if you have a certain skill set, and that skill set is often defined in the job description of the job that you're applying for. Job descriptions are incredibly important. We're going to talk a lot about job descriptions in a little bit. You have leadership experience. So even if the job that you're applying for is not a supervisory role or a managerial role, folks still want to know that you can, take charge of a situation, you can lead a project or a program, maybe that you can help train folks. So anywhere you can include leadership experience is really helpful. You have experience with the client population or the issue that the organization is most concerned with, but even beyond that, you have experience working with diverse people and communities. We know that no person is one identity or one experience, right? We're all intersecting identities and experience. Organizations really want to see that you have experience working with a diverse group of folks. So basically, what it boils down to is, can you do the job? Will you do the job? And will you fit in? And that will you fit in piece is often where the interview comes in. A lot of time, by the time you get to the interview stage, hiring managers will have decided, okay, well, this person probably has the skills that we're looking for. The interview is often to see, is this person going to be someone who can fit into our organizational culture? Is this someone who we want to work with every day for the next however many years? And if you want to hear me talking more about interviews, you can come to the student webinar in April. So here's a question for you. Feel free to type your thoughts in the chat if you have a guess here. How long do you think the average hiring manager looks at a resume before they decide if they're interested in the candidates? Does anyone have a guess? Feel free to drop it in the chat if you do. Seven seconds, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 seconds, 10 seconds, 2 minutes, not long. All right, 5 minutes. I think I saw 5 seconds. So we have basically everywhere from 5 seconds to 10 minutes. I think that's the range that I've seen so far. So that's a really, pretty wide range. So there are a few folks who are a little bit closer on this, and those are the folks who guessed really, really low. It is 6 seconds. So that is obviously not a lot of time, right? This does not mean that you have to be able to communicate everything about yourself to a hiring manager in 6 seconds. That is obviously not a possible thing for you to do. What this does mean is that when hiring managers are taking that initial look at resumes, when they get a stack of resumes for whatever job opening they have, and they're kind of scanning through them, they are generally looking for a very specific set of skills or experiences. Usually it's pretty limited as well. 2, 3, maybe 4 things that they know that this person has to have. And if they can't find those 2, 3, or 4 things on your resume really quickly, there is a good chance you're going to end up in a no pile before anyone has a chance to look more closely at the work that you've done. So one of the things that we're going to spend a fair amount of time today talking about is how to make sure you are identifying the right things that hiring manager might be looking for, and how you make those things apparent on your resume. So let's start with some basic information. I'm going to run through a couple slides of basics. Your resume should be no longer than 2 pages. Sometimes folks are told it should not be longer than 1 page. It can be longer than 1 page. It should not be longer than 2 pages. The exception here is if you're doing a CV. CVs are completely different animals than resumes. CVs are usually used when you're applying for an academic job. Resumes are used for basically everything else. CVs can be basically as long as you want them to be. Resumes should be no longer than 2 pages. So this is something that people sometimes forget about, but make sure your resume looks nice. Spend a little bit of time thinking about how it looks. So, what fonts are you using? You don't have to only use Calibri or Times New Roman. You can do something a little bit different as long as it is professional looking. Are you going to bold anything? Are you going to underline anything? The resumes that I read that I have the most trouble with, and I read a lot of them because I'm the person who reviews them for NASW North Carolina, are the ones where everything is one font size, one font, nothing is underlined, nothing is bolded, there's very little spacing anywhere. And those are hard because it's just hard to find the information that you would be looking for on there. So, think about the way that it looks. You're not applying for a job as a graphic designer. You don't have to have tons of art skills, but you can kind of, highlight certain things or change certain things around. So something that some folks have been doing more recently that I've been seeing is using color on their resumes. So you can do this. There's nothing wrong with this. If you are going to use color on your resume, I always suggest you use it sparingly. So that means you don't want to use all of the different colors of the rainbow, and you don't want to have your entire resume in like red font, basically, right? That's not what we're really looking for here. What it does mean is you can use it as a highlight, basically. Maybe you use it for your section headers or your name at the top, just to kind of make a few things kind of stand out or pop a little bit more. The one thing to be aware of when you're using color, however, is that sometimes automated tracking systems, what I've abbreviated here as ATSs, can have trouble with font colors that are not black. An automated tracking system is a computer program that scans your resume or your cover letter before a human being reads it. That computer program is programmed to find, those skills, the things that I said that hiring manager was looking for, those 2, 3, or 4 things. That's what a computer program is scanning it for. And so if you know that the job that you're applying for is probably using an automated tracking system, I would not recommend using any font color other than black. One big clue that the job that you're applying to is using an automated tracking system is if the job is asking you to upload your resume or cover letter to a website. If it is asking you to upload it, the odds are pretty high they're probably using a computer program. If you are just attaching it in an email to a human being, more often than not, a human being is going to look at that first. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule either way. Sometimes there are exceptions, but generally speaking, that tends to be the case. So one thing I've been seeing a lot of folks do a lot of as well is use online resume templates to build their resume. There is nothing inherently wrong with this either. The problem with these resume templates come in with just the simple fact that a lot of people use them. So I would say that probably half of the resumes that I see look exactly the same because folks have used online resume templates. If you kind of extrapolate that out to a hiring manager who gets 100 applications, if 50 of those resumes look exactly the same and you're one of those 50, it's going to be that much harder for you to stand out. So even if you use an online template, I always recommend that you try to think about ways you can play around with it, change some things, maybe reorder some things or change the way something looks on it just to make it look a little bit different. Make sure that your resume flows. Are you grouping similar sections together? Because you should be. People shouldn't have to hunt to find information. If you have one type of section and then you have another type that's related, those should be grouped together. Be consistent throughout your resume. This is something that's often easier said than done. And the reason for that is that a resume is not generally a document that we sit down and write at one time. It's often a document that we come back to. We're constantly adding new stuff to it. And so as a result, it can be really easy to not think about or not look at how you have written something before. So, for example, in one section, are all of your dates right aligned? If so, all of your dates should be right aligned in every section. Are you ending your bullet points with periods or without periods? Either is fine, either of them is a fine stylistic choice, but you need to pick one and be consistent with every single bullet point. These are things that sound like small little details, but hiring managers do notice them. And one of the things that folks love to talk to hiring managers about is their attention to detail. Well, if you're talking about your attention to detail and your resume is kind of littered with these inconsistencies, they're going to notice that. Please proofread your resume. I cannot stress that enough. You will not catch everything. Spell check will not catch everything. You need to constantly be looking at it before you submit to every job. Do not just assume just because you've never seen an error there does not mean that one does not exist. It's easy to look at the same document 10, 15 times and miss something. So please keep proofreading your resume. Give it to someone else to proofread, just to get a fresh set of eyes on that. Social work, we love jargon. So jargon is basically words or phrases that are really specific to social work, that maybe are even specific to the organization that we've worked in. You cannot assume that the person who reads your resume is going to have any idea what it is that you are talking about. They may not even be a social worker. So you need to use really clear, specific language. Same thing with acronyms. We love acronyms in social work. Even if it seems like the most obvious acronym in the whole wide world to you, you need to spell it out at least once on your resume. The first time you use it, you should spell it out and then put in parentheses the acronym, and then you can use the acronym throughout the rest of the resume. So again, this is another great opportunity to give your resume to just someone in your life, a friend, family member, roommate, whoever, who is not a social worker, and ask them to read it and ask them, are all of the things that you're listing making sense to them? And if not, if they are like, I don't know what this means, or I don't know what this you're talking about here, you should probably try to reword that. Well, other basic things. Reading on your resume should be in reverse chronological order. So that means when it ended goes at the top. So what ended most recently, what ended most recently to that goes underneath that, what ended most recently to that. So whatever you're currently doing, or whatever ended most recently goes at the top. That is for every section, not just your work section, but every section needs to be in reverse chronological order. So this is something that sounds a little counterintuitive to folks sometimes, but including more on your resume is not necessarily better. Sometimes folks who don't have a ton of varied jobs in social work will sometimes think, okay, well, I really only have my internship. I'm going to list 20 bullet points underneath it because it's going to make me look really impressive that I did these 20 different things at this internship. The problem with this is, again, if that hiring manager is looking for a really specific set of skills and you're including them, but they're surrounded by 16 or 17 other bullet points, it's going to be really hard for them to find the information they're looking for. So we always recommend you have between 3 and 8 bullet points. So no more than 8, but that also goes the other way, no fewer than 3. Sometimes I sent resumes where folks will have 1 or even 0 bullet points listed under a job. You should be able to come up with at least 3 things you did at a job. And if you can't, then you need to seriously think about whether it's something worth including on your resume. I keep talking about bullet points. They've actually done research on this. They have found that when folks try to write their work experience in paragraph form and not in bullet points, hiring managers just don't read it. They will generally read 1 sentence of that paragraph and then stop. So if you want folks to read through the work that you've done, write in bullet points. Send your resume and your cover letter as PDF files, not as Word documents. You never know what version of Microsoft Word someone's going to have. If it's an older version and they're opening it up, the formatting may look really weird to them. So send it as a PDF so you know what it's going to look like. Make sure that your name is in the file name. You should not be sending a file to a hiring manager that says something like resume draft number 19 or spring 2023 resume. You know, it should be first name, last name, and then generally the name of your position. So if I was that you're applying for, so if I was applying for my own job, I would say something like Seth Maid, Director of Membership resume, Seth Maid, Director of Membership cover letter. We're going to talk about this more in a little bit, but you need to also be thinking about not only including things that you've done, but things that you've done well. So you need to be trying to integrate achievements, accomplishments into your resume as well. And like I said, we're going to talk a lot more about that in a few minutes. All right, so I know that I've already kind of dumped a lot of information on you. So let's pause here for questions. Does anyone have any questions about anything that I have talked about? Feel free to type it in the chat or unmute if you have a question. I think I saw somebody wrote GPA in the chat. I guess I'm assuming that they mean, should you be including your GPA on your resume? The answer is no, you do not need to do that unless you are applying to like grad school or a doctoral program. If you're applying to just a job, I regret to be the one to have to tell you this, but folks are not going to care about your GPA. They care about the fact that you have the degree. That's the most important thing. Any other questions?
Hi there. Sorry, for some reason, mine is not unmuting. And I don't know why. So I'm using I'm so glad you're here. I'm using my friend's computer. But I was the one who typed GPA. I didn't mean to send it. I was just typing it in the chat as notes to ask a question about. But I know that you said something about you know, spelling out all the acronyms. I'm like, does that include GPA? Because it's just such a well-known one. I've never seen on a resume where they spelled out grade point average before. It's always been GPA. So is like even that a case of when you would spell out an acronym?
Yeah, I mean, so I think if you want to, if you're just gonna include your GPA on your resume, then it's fine. Probably just leave it as GPA. But again, I would not recommend doing that. It's just kind of a waste of space and it's not something that hiring managers are really looking for anyway. So if you're going to include it, I think it's okay to just say GPA. That can be the exception to the rule, but you know, you don't need to include it basically.
Okay, and then my other question that I had as far as the PDF that you mentioned, I was always advised that to, you know, put it in a PDF version because of the whole formatting issue. But at the same time, I've also heard from people where you don't want to do that because those scanning machines that you had mentioned before, where you have to upload it and it, you know, takes out keywords, they don't always recognize PDFs. And so sometimes I hear advice where like, no, you should, you know, submit a Word document so that I could pull those terms better, but I'm not sure which one.
Of course. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I have never heard of a scanning system not being able to read a PDF, and my assumption would be, and maybe this is a false assumption, but my assumption would be that if a scanning system could not read a PDF, they would not let you upload a PDF. Sometimes they do limit the types of Word document, type of documents that you can upload. So they may say, upload this as a Word document or upload this in this file format, in which case you would want to do whatever they're asking for. But if they are not asking you to do that, then I think you would be 100% okay submitting as a PDF.
Okay. And then my last question so far, I promise, for what we've already covered, when you were talking about the whole like chronological order of things, I know that on my resume, I have things that I started volunteering as a guardian ad litem before my previous position. I'm still a guardian ad litem, but that previous position has ended, even though it started after that. Would the guardian ad litemship be before or after that job that it spanned across, like over basically? Would it be
If you're still doing something, it goes at the top. Whatever you're still doing goes at the top. So, if it was guardian ad litem from June 2020 through present, that would go at the top. If you finish and then underneath that would be whatever ended most recently to what you're currently doing. So whatever you're still doing goes at the top. Whatever you're not doing anymore goes in the order by when it ended.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. So there was also a question in the chat about including pictures, or I'm guessing photos is what that person is referring to. So it is considered to be bad practice to include a photo on your resume, and there's a couple of reasons why. So unless you are applying for a job in which somebody is going to care about that, like a model, like you're applying to be a model or an actor or something, it is generally said to not include a photo of yourself. One of the biggest reasons for that is that sometimes hiring managers will completely disregard resumes that have photos on them because they are worried about getting caught up in some kind of discrimination lawsuit. So these people do not want to know what you look like, basically. You don't want to kind of maybe rule yourself out of a position because a hiring manager is a little bit wary about something. So, I would not recommend doing that. All right, so let's keep on moving. So I'm going to pause again in a few more slides for questions again. So if anything comes up, feel free to just kind of hold on to it. Or if you want to go ahead and put it in the chat while I'm talking, that's okay too. So, I'm not sure if I'm going to have time to talk about cover letters today. If I don't, then the one thing that I will definitely want to leave you with is never submit a generic cover letter. You should never be submitting a generic cover letter. You need to be writing a brand new cover letter for every job that you are applying to. The same is actually true for your resumes, and this is something that a lot of folks don't do. A lot of times people have one resume that they send everywhere. The problem with this is that not every job is going to be looking for the same set of skills or experiences. There may be some overlap, there may be, some overlapping skills, but often there's going to be some differences as well. And because of that, your resume needs to represent those differences. So you need to be adjusting your resume to whatever job that you are applying to. This does not mean starting from scratch. What this does mean is maybe making some small changes, like reordering some of your bullet points so that something a little bit more relevant is at the top. Maybe you're taking something out that isn't relevant or putting something in that is. Maybe you're even changing some of your word choices, and we're going to talk about how to do that in a few slides. Those are more of the kind of things that we're talking about. Something else that I often really recommend folks do, especially folks who are kind of in the position that a lot of y'all are in, about to graduate, is that you divide your work into two different work sections. The reason why I recommend this for students especially is that often students have some social work experience and then a fair amount of non-social work experience, and maybe even non-social work experience that you're currently doing. And so sometimes folks think, I don't want like my retail job or my server job or something to be at the top of my resume. I'm currently doing it, so that's where it would need to be. but that's not what I want social work managers to see first. So how do I deal with this situation? And the answer there is to have two work sections. Your first work section would be called something like social work experience. And that would include literally anything social work related you have ever done. So paid social work experience, internships. Internships are social work experience and should be treated like jobs. So you should be listing them like you would a paid job. Volunteer experience. A lot of volunteer experience is social work experience. And so you can list it. Again, you would want to treat it like you would a job, or you're listing it, you're putting bullet points underneath it, but you absolutely can do that. So that's your first work section. Your second work section would be called something like other work experience. And that's where you could list some of your other not especially relevant jobs, but you're still including them because you want to demonstrate a paid work history. That is something that hiring managers like to see. So this is a way to get that on your resume without it being kind of the first, 1, 2, or 3 things that a hiring manager may be looking at. All right. I know there's a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to circle around to them in just a few minutes. I want to get through this section first, and then we'll come back around to those questions. Let's talk a little bit about objective statements and professional summaries. So an objective statement is something you often see on a cover, on a resume, and usually it's name, contact information, and then an objective. And while I'm talking about the header, the name and the contact information, I know someone did ask about including your address in there, so we can all go ahead and answer this. You do not need to include your street address. This is kind of an antiquated system from back in the olden days when email did not necessarily exist, right? And folks would have to mail you a response through the actual mail if they wanted you to come in for an interview or something like that. You don't need to do that. What I generally recommend is you definitely include your email address. You definitely include your phone number. If you are applying for a job that is located somewhere around you, then you can put city and state without the street address, just city and state. If you're applying for a job that is elsewhere, like in another state or something, I would leave that off completely. I would only include email address and phone number, because you don't want to draw attention to the fact that you don't live in that community, right? You don't want a hiring manager to think about, well, I don't want to have to deal with them moving here, so no, right? So in that situation, I would just leave that off completely. All right, back to objectives. So an objective statement usually goes underneath that header, and they look often like what's on your screen right now. Objective, recent graduate seeking position as a school social worker to work with children, and so on. So we actually recommend pretty strongly you do not do an objective statement. And the reason for this is that you are taking up really valuable space on your resume to tell a hiring manager something they already know. They know you want a job as a school social worker because you're probably applying for a job as a school social worker. So why are you telling them that? And the other side of that is, if you have objectives to get a job as a school social worker on your resume and you're not applying for a job as a school social worker, they're going to think, well, what does this person want to do? Why are they looking for this job at all? So it's just not helpful. What is helpful is what's called a professional summary. And a professional summary goes in the exact same space. It goes right underneath your header and your contact information. It's still about the same length. It's 1 to 3 sentences. But instead of talking about what you want to do, this describes who you are as a social worker, what your skills and experiences are, what you would bring to the organization. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. So here is one. Licensed clinical social worker with 6+ years experience in medical and clinical mental health, working with diverse populations in private practice, healthcare, outpatient, and inpatient treatment settings, recently relocated to state. So in 2 sentences, this social worker has told us that they're licensed, how long they've been doing it, what practice areas they've been working in what settings they've been working in, and even why they're looking for another job. This is so much more helpful than if this person had just said something like objective to get a job at a mental health facility. That doesn't tell a hiring manager anything. This tells them exactly what you've been doing. So this used to be the only professional summary that I used to show, and I would often get questions from students saying something along the lines of, well, that's all well and good for somebody who's been in the field for 6 years. How do I write a professional summary for someone like me who doesn't have a ton of professional experience? And my response to you is that you do have some professional experience. Again, you do have those internships. Maybe you have volunteer experience. Even if you don't have paid social work experience, that doesn't mean you don't have professional social work experience. So I have another professional summary to show you. This is for someone who's a little bit more towards where y'all are at this point in your careers. And this is a professional summary that is written just using one internship at placement as a school social worker and using some volunteer experience volunteering at a local community LGBTQ center. So just using those two things and the things that this person did at those two things, you could do a professional summary that looks something like this. Recently graduated social worker with knowledge in case management, intake, and program management and evaluation, experience working with diverse populations, including children, teenagers, and the LGBTQ community in a variety of settings, including middle and high schools and community. Again, there's no paid social work experience in that professional summary. It is all internship and volunteer experience, just things that this person has done. So it is a skill to write professional summaries. And so it can take a little bit of, a time to get it right. But once you do, it can be really helpful to hiring managers. All right, so let me kind of circle back. To some of the questions. I answered that one. How can you incorporate pending licensure? Should it be included? So if the job that you're applying for is looking for LCSWAs and you are planning to get your LCSWA as soon as you graduate, but you can't apply for it until you graduate, but you're applying for jobs now, I think it is okay to have a licensure section on your resume. You could have licensed clinical social worker associate, and then how you would say for the date right now is something like expected June 2023, right? You need the word expected because you don't have this thing yet, but this is just kind of a flag to the hiring manager that this is on your radar, you're planning on doing this. If you've graduated and you're still looking for a job and you've already applied for this, then it could say licensed clinical social worker associate, application pending, or something like that, right? Let's see. What if a field experience turned into a job? Would I list the position as both an internship and job or change it into job? So if you are, it depends. It depends on if you're doing the exact same thing. If you basically are doing the exact same thing, then I would list it as one entity. So you don't need two separate sets of bullet points describing the exact same thing, basically. But you list two position titles and you list two sets of dates, right? Because you want it to make it clear that you are doing this one set of bullet points, but in two different roles. If you are hired and you're doing something different than what your internship was, then I would list those as two completely different listings. Two sets of bullet points. Should we include LinkedIn info? You can absolutely you can have a link to your LinkedIn. A lot of people will put it kind of in that contact info. So they'll have email address, phone number, and then a link to their LinkedIn. You can absolutely do that. All right, so let's keep on moving. I have about 20 more minutes left and a lot of slides that I want to get through, so I'm going to keep moving. We will pause for questions again at least one more time, though. So keep typing them in the chat if they come to you while I'm talking. All right, so let's talk about keywords. So keywords are these words and phrases that I keep talking about that hiring managers and automated tracking systems are looking for. So this is the way to demonstrate to either a person or a computer that you are a good fit for this job. And these are things you need to integrate into your resume. So where do you find them? You need to do some research. The job description is the absolute best place to find keywords. And we're going to look at a couple sample job descriptions in just a minute. The employer website can be really helpful. If it's like especially if it's like a community nonprofit or something like that, look at their website, look at their mission statement, their vision statement, look at the words they're using to describe the work that they're doing, and then try to mirror that back. LinkedIn can be helpful here if you want to be a school social worker. Look up school social workers on LinkedIn and see what language they're using to describe the work that they're doing. We talked about spelling out acronyms. Another really good reason to spell out acronyms is acronyms often contain keywords. So if you spell it out at least once, you know that a computer program will flag it. Here is a sample job description. It's probably a little shorter than the ones that you are seeing if you are applying for jobs currently, but it fits our purposes for tonight. So if you were applying for a job and this was the job description, what sorts of things would you try to pull out of here? Well, there's actually a lot. Number one, if there are specific skills that they are looking for someone to do, those are really important to include if you have done them. Psychosocial assessment, counseling, case management, call rotation. If you have done any or all of those things, make sure you are saying so. And when I say include these things on your resume, I mean use these exact words. So if they're looking for someone to do case management and you have and you've done it, but you have on your resume, referred patients or referred clients to community resources, that's basically case management. Say that you've done case management, right? So like use the specific language that they are looking for. Who are you going to be working with? Families enrolled in hospice. If you've worked with people enrolled in hospice, you should say so. But even if you've worked with families, that's still something they're looking for. Make sure you mention that. Even something like patients. So if at your job, you call the people you see clients, and this job calls them patients, for this resume, change clients to patients. It means the same thing, but you are matching the language that they are looking for. Even things like where a job is located, Moore and Montgomery County. If you've worked in one of those two counties, make sure folks know that. Here's another job description. This one's a little bit longer. The reason why I showed this is to show you that one of the biggest flags for you that something is important, that it's a keyword, is if it is repeated. You can see just even in this short job description, how often things tend to be repeated. There tends to be some repetition in job description. If you see something mentioned a couple of times, it is almost certainly important and you should try to mention it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about bullet points, because bullet points are the number one issue that I see on people's resumes. And it's always the same issue. It is that folks are not nearly specific or descriptive enough in describing the work that they are doing. So here are some examples of some things that I often see on resumes that are not nearly specific enough. Provide psychotherapy to clients. Conduct assessments, provide case management, work on multidisciplinary team. And then these last two, the ones that are highlighted in red, they are things that I see especially on student resumes. So attending meetings. Attending a meeting is not a skill, and it is not an experience that is so unique that it is going to set you apart from any other person. Did you do something at this meeting? That may be something to indicate, did you give agency updates? Did you give a presentation? But saying that you sat in a room while a meeting happened around you is not. And then this last one, assisted with intake. Folks who are students, I've noticed this especially on student resumes, tend to use really passive language to describe the work that they have done, especially through their internship. So by passive language, I mean assisted with, observed, helped with, shadowed, watched, these sorts of things. The problem with this is that if you tell me you assisted with something, I don't actually know what that means. If you say you assisted with intake, that could mean a lot of different things. That could mean that you started your internship watching someone do intakes. As the internship went on, gradually you took on more and more responsibility. And by the end of it, you were doing intakes all by yourself. You were referring people all over your organization. It could mean that, or it could mean you spent your entire internship handing someone a form. I have no idea unless you tell me. So I always encourage folks to use really active language that is descriptive about what you did. And I always remind students that just because somebody was helping you doesn't mean you didn't actually do it. Even if you had help or you were being trained in something, that you were still doing it. Nobody learns how to do anything without being trained in it or without being helped. And so That is not a reason to kind of couch this in these really passive terms. If you did something, own it. You did it, and you should indicate that on your resume. So when you're thinking about how to write bullet points, we recommend you use what's called a PAR story, and that stands for problem, action, result. What problem did you solve? What did you do to solve it? And then what happened, and how are things better than they were before? So here's an example of what this might look like. So instead of saying provide psychotherapy to clients, which is not a good bullet point, you could say something like this: provide group and individual outpatient therapy to adult clients at a substance use treatment center utilizing cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, and motivational interviewing with the goal of setting steps toward recovery. If you had just told me that you provided psychotherapy to clients, that does not give me any of this information. As a hiring manager, I now know that you did group and individual outpatient therapy, who your clients were, what therapeutic modalities you were using, and why you were doing this with the goal of setting steps toward recovery. I would have no access to any of that information if you didn't tell me. And that is probably important information for a hiring manager to know. They may think, oh, well, we were looking for someone to do DBT and this person has that experience. No one else on staff has that. That would be awesome to add to our organization, right? You have no, but if you don't tell someone, they can't know. So we talked a little bit about including accomplishments and not just skills or experiences. I want to expand on that a little bit. So this is all about demonstrating how you were an asset to the organization. So it probably sounds obvious when I say it, but people want to hire folks who are good at their jobs. And the way that you demonstrate that you're good at your job is by including things that you did well, including accomplishments, including achievements. So let's talk about how you would do that. Here are some questions you might ask yourself when you're thinking about what you accomplished. This is not an all-inclusive list of things you could ask yourself, but here are some questions. Did you solve a problem for your organization? Did you make a direct impact on someone's life? You have almost certainly made a direct impact on someone's life if you're working as a social worker. You may need to think about how to put that into words, but you almost certainly have done that. Did you suggest or help with any new procedures or programs? Did you train or supervise anyone? Were you asked to do a special project? And interns are asked to do special projects all the time. It is like the #1 thing interns are asked to do. Here's this thing that we've always wanted someone to do and no one's ever had time for it. So please do this thing for us, right? That is a special project. Did you save the organization money? Did you contribute to a grant proposal? Was there a fundraiser going on and you did all the social media for it? Then you contributed to raising however much money the organization brought in. So talk about that. So let's take a look at a couple of bullet points so we can see not only how you can be more specific about the work that you've been doing, but also turn those specific bullet points into accomplishments or achievements. So here's one: facilitated presentation to community partners. So again, this is neither specific enough, nor does it really give us any hint about how well you did this presentation. So instead of saying that, you might say something like this: facilitated domestic violence 101 presentation, again being specific, to 25 community partners, quantifying your work. And because presentations often come with an evaluation component, maybe you have access to this last bit, of whom 96% reported an increase in knowledge on the post-test. You absolutely can be including evaluation data on your resume. If I was a hiring manager and I saw this, I would think, oh, well, 96% of people learned something at this presentation. This person's probably pretty good at giving this presentation. And that's what you want them to come away with. Here's another one: updated agency forms. I see this bullet point a lot on student resumes. This is something that a lot of interns are asked to do. Updated agency forms. So again, this is not specific enough, but you can also turn even something like this into an accomplishment. How would you do that? Well, it might look something like this: updated 5 agency forms, including client information, informed consent, and emergency contact information, to include more gender and relationship options in order to better serve the LGBTQ community. So all of a sudden, you've taken a pretty mundane task, updating these forms, and turned it into something that, because you did it, Your organization can better serve the community. That is an accomplishment. That is an achievement. You have opened up who this organization can serve in a better way. That is a great thing to demonstrate. All right, so I have about 3 more slides and I'm on resumes. I'm going to go ahead and get through them, and then we'll save the rest of the time for questions. So here are a few things not to do on your resume. Do not put salary negotiable on your resume. There is a time and there is a place to talk about salary. It is not on a resume that you're just kind of sending off to somebody. When a hiring manager sees salary negotiable, it will immediately devalue you in their eyes, because they think, okay, so I have a hiring range of $40,000 to $50,000. They're saying they're already willing to negotiate with me. I'm probably not going to have to offer them 50 because they're already saying they'll work with me on this. I'll offer them 40, right? You're not going to get the higher range of that salary. So again, there's a time and a place to talk about it, not on your resume. You do not have to say references available upon request on your resume. People will ask for your references when they want them. Do not include reference information on your resume. If you are asked for them, they should be on a separate document. I am not a fan of a skill section. And the reason why I am not a fan of a skill section is that folks often fill them up with information that is not helpful, and not helpful in a really specific way. Generally, it is not, again, not nearly specific enough to be helpful. So if you have a skill section that's full of things like hard worker, good communicator, team player, that is not helpful. Even things like program management, that is not helpful. I don't know how you're skilled at program management simply because you told me you were skilled at program management. What is much more helpful is if you include bullet points explaining how you're skilled in these various things. That's helpful. Just having a skill section where you list something is not. Same thing with, proficient in Microsoft Word, or I know how to use Gmail, or I know how to use Firefox. I've seen all of these things recently on resumes. The year is 2023. There is a certain baseline expectation of some technological knowledge. So things like Word or email or internet browsers are included in those things. If somebody says, in their job description, we need someone to use Microsoft Excel to do X, Y, and Z, and you've used Microsoft Excel at a job, then instead of saying I'm skilled in this, use a bullet point to talk about how you used Excel through your work. That is much more helpful. A few other things. When you graduate, your degree will be either a Master of or Bachelor of Social Work. It is not a Master's or Bachelor's. It is not a Master in or Bachelor in. It is a Master of or Bachelor of. We talked about including field experience and volunteer experience. You can link to things on your resume. We talked about including a LinkedIn link. You can link to other publications if you have them. If you're a member of NASW, organizations that hire a lot of social workers like to see that the folks they hire are members of their chosen profession's professional association. So if you're a member of NASW, make sure you have a professional affiliation section where you say that you're a member of NASW. And don't forget to talk about who your clients were. Be specific. Don't just say saw clients. You want to say, youth, older adults, LGBTQ folks, people living with a mental illness. And while we're talking about it, it's people living with a mental illness, not mentally ill people. You want to use person first, person-centered language. If you are not sure what the correct terminology is to describe a population, and you may not be, words change, and sometimes they change frequently. Google it. I cannot stress this enough. Do not just guess with what you think the right terminology is. At the very least, go to the organization's website and see what words they use to describe the population they're serving. There are a few faster ways to end up in a no pile than to use outdated and potentially offensive language. Make sure that you're including city and state for every job that you are listing. Even if it seems really obvious to you where something is located, make sure you're including city and state. Employment dates. Employment dates should be listed month and year to month and year, or month and year to present if you're still doing it. Do not use the seasons to mark the passage of time on your resume. So that means no doing that you worked a job from spring 2020 through fall 2022. It should be month and year to month and year. Make sure you're including the name of the job title and the organization's name. You'd be surprised. People sometimes leave those things out. And again, I know I mentioned it earlier, but I cannot stress it enough. Please proofread your resume. It is very important. Okay, so we have a couple minutes left. So let's pause for some questions. So in the chat, should we put specific numbers for amount of clients you serve? So it depends. You don't have to say, while you were at this organization, you counseled 39 different people, right? What you could say maybe is you handled a caseload of 10, of around 10 folks, or an average of 10 folks. That might be a little bit more helpful in the context of, what someone is actually looking for. So you can put numbers like that, or, trained 300 people through 20 different presentations, right? That can be helpful. It just kind of depends on the context of what you're doing. So I think I talked about this already. So you do not have to have a skill section. I recommend that you do not include a skill section. The one exception to the skill section rule is if for whatever reason there is something that you have done in your life, but you've never done it through a job. So, for example, maybe in the job description, they're looking for someone to help updating the agency website. So they're looking for, so if you have HTML knowledge, that might be really helpful. Let's say you've never done HTML through a job, but you took a couple of community college courses on it or something, right? Then maybe you include a skill section where you mention that specific skill that they're looking for that you can't include anywhere else. Otherwise, I always recommend just including things as a bullet point and giving it the context that it actually needs. Okay, other questions? Let me stop sharing my slide. Any other questions about resumes? We don't have a ton of time left, but if you have questions about anything else, I'm happy to try to answer them for a couple more minutes. So.
I have questions. Again, my mic is not working. No, neither is my keyboard really, so that's why I haven't typed them. But when I noticed the bullet points that you were showing, they were longer than I was expecting, like bullet points to be allowed to be. I am very guilty of turning bullet points into paragraphs. And I've always been self-conscious of that and worried about that. How long can what can I get away with? Like, how long can a bullet point be before it's too much?
Yeah, that's a great question that comes up a lot. So, yes, the bullet point, especially like the one about doing inpatient and outpatient therapy and things like that, that looks really long on a PowerPoint slide. On a Word document, that's probably going to be about 2 lines. So something like that is fine. You can maybe get to even like 2.5 lines. I probably wouldn't go beyond that. If you start getting into the 3-4 line mark, that could be divided into multiple bullet points. Something you can do, and people don't always know that they can do this, is you can even do sub bullets, right? So you can have your bullet and then you can have a sub bullet. You can do that. I have that on my resume for an old job that I did where I was leading a couple different programs. So I say something like, I led these programs, and then for each, I had a sub bullets about each one of the programs, right? So you can do something like that if you need the room.
Okay, fascinating. Follow-up question to that though. If you are prone to long bullet points, does that affect the amount of bullet points you should use on under a single job?
3 days.
Yeah. So I mean, I would still stick to the 3 to 8 rule. Generally speaking, my response is always going to be include the information that is most relevant to the job that you're applying for. And if that's what you're still doing and you have 8 bullet points that are a little bit longer, I think that's okay. But if it turns out that you end up with like 4 kind of longer but really descriptive bullet points, that's okay too. But again, you want to really be focusing not just on like describing everything you've ever done, but describing the things that are most relevant to this particular job that you're applying to.
Okay. And then the very last question that I had, getting away from that topic, but a very quick question about the professional affiliations that you just mentioned. Would that go where we as students would normally put like our GPA and like, oh, we went to school here, we are affiliates of this. Do we list honor societies, fraternities and stuff like that that actually show achievement?
Yeah, so that's a couple of different questions. So I'll try to get to all of them. So a professional affiliation section is separate than your education. So you would have an education section where you talk about education related things. Professional affiliations would be separate. Usually that's kind of lower on your resume, maybe one of the last sections that you have, and that's okay. Things like honor societies, I don't know. I'm pretty torn about these. I don't feel like they're super duper helpful. And the reason why I don't feel like they're super duper helpful is that a lot of times folks don't know what that even means, right? So like, if you have the space and you want to, put, you are a member of some honor society and then put a bullet point underneath it describing what that means, I think you could do that. But, then you start getting into, is my resume getting a little cluttered looking? Am I just dumping a lot of information on here that isn't going to be the most relevant or helpful information to this hiring manager? So I'm not going to tell you take off your honor societies, but I don't know that you need to be including it.
Thank you.
Any other last questions? Nothing else?
Oh, training and certificates, would that go at the bottom, lower on the resume too?
So trainings and certificates could be their own section as well. Generally speaking, that's going to be kind of closer to the bottom of your resume as well. The thing that I will stress about this, just like I've been saying about everything else, is only include trainings or certifications that are relevant to the job that you're applying for. As a social worker, you're going to be attending over the course of your career 1 million trainings, and you may be certified in 1 million different things. Not all of them are going to be relevant to every job. So include the things that are relevant. When you are listing a training or certification, you need to put the month and year that you were trained and or certified in that thing. And because if you say you were trained in something and but it was 10 years ago, that is something that versus 6 months ago, there's maybe a lot of changes or adaptations made to whatever it is you were trained in that a hiring manager would probably want to know about. So you need to put the month and year. The other thing that I always recommend if you're listing trainings or certifications, and it is not immediately clear from the name of the training what it is, again, making the assumption that a hiring manager is not going to know what the heck you're talking about, you need to put a bullet point underneath it describing what it is. You don't have to do 3 bullet points. It's not like you're listing a job, but list 1 bullet point saying what it is. The example that I always give is there's something called darkness to light training, which is a training for child sexual abuse prevention. But if you just listed darkness to light training, someone would have no idea what that actually was, right? So you need to put a bullet point explaining this training covered this topic, basically, or this certification is for this, right? Because that's what gives that helpful context to a hiring manager.
Seth, I have a question,
Sure.
and I'm asking this on behalf of a couple of students I have. So say they're doing their resume and they had a job for a while and they lost that job. They were fired from that job, but they had a lot of good experience at that job. How do they handle that on a resume?
So I wouldn't handle that on a resume because the resume is not really the place to talk about that. Probably an interview is the place where you're going to talk about that. If you have been asked to leave a job for whatever reason, you can still list, if you have good skills or experiences there, I would list it like you would any other job, put the month and year to month and year, list the things that you're doing. And be prepared in an interview to talk about what happened, right? So, because you'll probably be asked about it if it seems like you left something, or if it was the last thing you did and you don't, you may be asked, why did you leave your previous position, or what happened here? So the key thing here is, you never want to lie. You never want to misrepresent anything. Social work is a very small field. A lot of social workers know a lot of social workers. So you need to be honest and upfront about it. So if you were asked to leave a job, you need to be able to say, this is what happened. Now, the important thing here is to not just leave it at this is what happened, but here is what I learned from the situation, and here's how I know it won't happen again, right? So the situation, it really, made me figure out that I needed to do X, Y, and Z. And so I've been working on this thing. So I'm confident that it won't happen again, right? You need to address it and show growth. Those are the things that you're really going to be trying to do. People get fired, people get let go. It happens, right? But again, the thing that you are most concerned with is showing that you've learned from it. Everybody messes up, so you show that you've learned from it and that you're able to move on.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions? All right, y'all. Well, if there are no other questions, then I will just say thank you so much for your time and attention tonight. I'm going to drop my email address in the chat one more time, just so folks have it if they want to reach out to me, or if you join NASW North Carolina or anything like that, you can reach out to me. It's a little long, so let me make sure I got it right. Okay. Yes, so feel free to grab it from the chat if anybody wants to reach out to me. And otherwise, thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Seth. We enjoyed it. This is always a great workshop. So thanks a lot. And for the rest of you, thank you for coming, and I will see you soon. So have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.